Our topic for this session is Christian fasting. But before we get into that topic, I want you to meet Margaret Campbell. Margaret is from Houston, Texas, right?
Yes.
And is an interior designer by profession. But I want you to know that I have hiked with Margaret Campbell. She has summited two 14,000-foot mountains.
Yes.
Wasn't that an experience?
It was. It was.
I mean, for a flatlander to actually get at 14,000 feet is a real task.
I just didn't think it would take very long to get to the top, because when you stand at the bottom, they don't look very tall.
Yeah, it takes a bit, doesn't it? It keeps extending out.
And your son, Nathan, really coached me up that first one. I wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, that was a great time. Glandian, we're working on fasting in this session. With your love of coffee, I just think a little discipline here is in order, so I'd like to give you some water and take your cup.
Well, let me tell you that Margaret is not the only person that can summit a mountain. I had a summit the other day also. It was cold, and I walked from my car to the coffee shop. It was quite an experience.
Glandian told me the other day he actually tried fasting from coffee and made it all the way to 11:30, wasn't it?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock.
a.m.
Now, fasting is the voluntary denial of an otherwise normal function for the sake of intense spiritual activity. Now, there's nothing wrong with these normal functions in life. It is just that there are times when we set them aside in order to concentrate. Now, when we see that, we understand both the reasonableness of fasting as well as the broader dimensions to it. There are a lot of things to learn to fast from. For example, in our day, one of the greatest needs is to learn to fast from speech. You see, silence is one of the deepest disciplines of the spiritual life, simply because it puts the stopper on all that self-justification, all that managing of our public image. Now, in fasting, we are not trying to trick God into doing something or to manipulate God. We're not fasting for political pressure, that is, manipulating other human beings. We're not fasting to lose weight or vanity. No. Christian fasting has spiritual purposes. First, we're learning something about balance in life. We're learning how not to be so consumed by the consumer culture of our day. Fasting is kind of an inner alarm to catch us up, to understand the priorities of life. And then we also fast because it reveals the things that control us. You see, we hide with food and other good things what is inside of us, but in experiences of fasting, that comes to the surface. I remember in my first experiences of fasting, I constantly had this anger. Now, you have to understand, people would always say that I was such an easygoing sort of guy, nothing ever bothered me, loved to work under pressure. And I'd say, Lord, I'd so appreciate it if you'd teach me some of what's inside of me. And the Lord would say, delighted, how about a little fast? And pretty soon I'm exploding with anger. And at first I thought that I'm angry because I'm hungry. Now I understand about low blood sugar and all of that. But then I realized I'm angry because there is a spirit of anger within me that I need to deal with. And so coming to understand that there's so many things, pride. Do you have any idea how many religiously respectable ways there are for letting everybody know how good we are? You see? These are the kinds of things we begin to deal with in fasting. And then too, we learn to fast so that we might feast upon God. See, we learn by experience that we do not live by bread alone, but by every word which proceeds from the mouth of God. Now, that's not just nice poetic statement. It's a reality of being sustained. Now, Glandian, I took your cup here, but I just want to illustrate feasting upon God and give you a larger cup. How's that?
Thank you.
Now, let me share with you a very early experience I had with fasting and two results that came out of it that were both unexpected and very different. Oh, I was so rigid in those early days. You wouldn't have liked me a bit. I decided I was going to go into this little room and I was going to fast and pray for 3 days. And I did. Now, I went into that little experience primarily to pray for two people in our little fellowship. Now, these were physical matters. I don't know how you feel about those things, but that's just the way it was in my case. The first was an older woman in our fellowship that was terribly crippled up with arthritis, and I wanted to pray that she'd be well. And the other was a young man that I was meeting with in a hospital who was dying of cancer, and I wanted to pray that he would be well. Well, God did many wonderful things in that 3-day experience. However, the woman crippled with arthritis continued to be crippled with arthritis, okay? Until some years later, God's friends, the doctors, came up with a new kind of operation that gave her some substantial relief, and I'm delighted. The young man dying of cancer died. Now, he came into saving faith before he died. I'm glad for that. But you understand, I wanted them to be well. By that time, I had learned that it is helpful to listen. And so I said, Lord, I don't know about these things very much, but I'll do my best to be in a kind of listening mode. And if you have anything that you want to teach me, I'll try to learn it. The next night, I was at the home of a very dear friend of all of ours, Dallas Willard and his wife Jane and their children. And Dallas was inviting me to go to a Lutheran church to hear an Episcopal lady speak on prayer. Now, you have to understand, this was 1970. Here was a Baptist inviting a Quaker to go to a Lutheran church to listen to an Episcopalian. And I was hemming and hawing and trying to figure a way to get out of this. No, Dallas just nailed me to the wall. He says, Foster, the only difference between you and me and this woman is that when she prays, things happen. Okay, I'll go. So I went. Big church. I hid up on the balcony. Here was this little old lady, just kind of talking away. And you have to understand my attitude about it. I listened for a little while, and I thought to myself, I know more about homiletics than she does. She is going to teach me. And she was just talking along this kind of the way she talks. She says, now, when you are first beginning to pray, do not start with the most difficult cases, like arthritis and cancer. She said, begin more simply. Learn to pray for things you'd normally never think of praying for. You know, headaches and earaches. This light went on. Of course. The progression in the spiritual life. You don't take an occasional jogger and put them in a marathon race. And you don't do that in the spiritual life either. I mean, you know, we get our Bibles and we say, the disciples were in the upper room for 10 days, and then the Holy Spirit fell. We say, quick, everybody in the church, lock the doors. We're going to pray for 10 days. Now, after about a half an hour of that, I mean, it's such a dismal experience, we never want to pray again. Now, you know how I know about this, huh? So I began to understand the importance of small things. Remember the prophet, despise not the day of small things. But there was another result that came out of that prayer experience. And it was guidance simply to call a person that I knew quite well and respected for his spiritual discernment and his wisdom. Former missionary in South America, had worked with Elizabeth Elliot, if you know that name, and some others. And I called him. He lived some distance away. Bill, I've had this experience, and my best guidance is that you're to come and pray for me if you would. He said, let me take it under advisement. After a few days, he said, yes, I'll come. And he came. And the first thing he did when he came into my little office was to sit down and start confessing his sins to me. And I thought to myself, what is he doing? I mean, he's the spiritual giant. But you understand, he knew that that was in me. And he was bringing all of that down. And then he said, now, do you still want me to pray for you? You see what he'd done? He'd cleared the air so that this could be life and not manipulation. And I said yes. And he prayed for me one of the deepest prayers I have ever experienced. I still remember it today, about 32 years later. There are many things in the prayer, but the one that I want to just mention to you, and you have to understand, I was a young pastor trying to conquer the whole world, you know, and I wanted desperately to write, but I'd never told anybody. That was a sort of secret feeling of mine. And when he laid his hands upon me and prayed for me, and I still remember the words, I can even feel the tone, I pray for the hands of a writer. That's what he said. And the life, it freed me up, you see, to write. Now, isn't that something? How God is at work through all of the kinds of experiences. This isn't what I anticipated. This isn't what I was looking at. I was praying for some people who were ill. But God comes and teaches us, you see, so that we learn in experiences of fasting. Now, Margaret, you've had some experiences along these lines. Why don't you share a little?
Yes, I have. You know, you're encouraging us to lean into these spiritual practices. And when we do, sometimes we fail.
Yep.
I've learned as much about the discipline of fasting through my failures as my successes.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example, if I can. I was praying for a particular event over an extended period of time. I was undergoing a partial fast. I went to dinner with friends and everyone was encouraging me to have dessert with them. Finally, I said, no, I'm fasting. And immediately the fast was broken. Now, later, I came across one of the writings of the Desert Fathers that said something like this: in times of hospitality, quietly break the fast and then resume again. Oh. Now, I know it would have been better for me to order dessert, take a bite or two, and then quietly and prayerfully resume the fast. So we learn as we put these disciplines into practice.
And I would be happy to take the rest of the dessert.
I'm sure.
Glandian, how has this discipline worked out in your life?
In Deuteronomy, the scripture talks about God humbling them with hunger in order that they would know that we don't live by bread alone.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, when I fast, I'm confronted with a meditation, a reflection on God's way of humbling us in order to be sustained by a bread that is within His grace to give us.
Yeah.
I find for me that fasting does two things. It reminds me of the hungry, of those people who are in Africa or parts of our world, our society, who can't eat. In a time of great consumption and food on every corner, I think we need to be reminded of those who are suffering with hunger and starvation. And I think it quietens my soul and makes me to be more reflective and prayerful.
Yep.
The second reason for fasting for me is that it quietens my mind. It makes me more still. Hunger has a way of making you more still and more dependent on God's grace, His sustaining love. Now, I need to say that I'm a diabetic, so I can't go on long extended fasts. I can only do fast a breakfast or a lunch or some other means of fasting because of my medical condition.
Right.
But I believe it's a discipline that deepens your relationship, increases your dependency upon God, humbles your heart, and makes you more reflective and more conscious of some type of bread that can sustain you other than the bread that we can provide for ourselves.
Yep. You know, sometimes we need to fast so that we can be sensitive to those who, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, live an eternal compulsory fast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've asked George if he might share with us a musical piece that would draw out for us seeking and yearning and longing. So listen to those three rhythms as he ministers to us in music. George?
Travel with me if you would. As we seek for the face of God, seeking His glory, the reflection of who He is, His beauty, His reality, would you in your mind and your hearts seek the face of God for a moment? We yearn for God. Let's for a moment concentrate and think of the yearning that we have for the heart of God, knowing Him, knowing His very center, so that ours might come to His love, to His care, to His understanding. Yearning. And then longing for that intimate relationship with God. Being in His presence, knowing His communication with us. All is open and free so that we might know Him.